The American Public Library, from democratic ideal to modern community hub. Introduction: a uniquely American institution. Welcome to this exploration of one of America's most enduring democratic institutions, the public library. Unlike subscription-based or academic libraries, the public library is funded primarily through local, state, and sometimes federal taxes, offering its services universally to all residents without charge. From its 19th-century origins as a mechanism for moral improvement and self-education for the working class, the American Public Library has continuously evolved. Today, it functions not only as a repository for books but also as a vital community hub, a digital access point, a social service provider, and a critical resource for economic development. In this presentation, we'll trace the library's journey from its earliest predecessors through the Carnegie era, the professionalization of the field, and into our current digital age. We'll examine the competing philosophies that shape library services, the controversies that challenge library professionals, and the open questions that will define the institution's future. Understanding this history will help you appreciate why libraries remain so essential to our communities today. Early antecedents before the public library. Before the true public library emerged, various models provided shared access to reading materials throughout the American colonies and early republic. These early institutions laid the groundwork for what would eventually become the free, tax-supported libraries we know today. Social libraries, also called subscription libraries, were founded by groups of citizens who pooled their resources. Benjamin Franklin's Library Company of Philadelphia, established in 1731, stands as one of the most famous examples. However, these libraries required membership fees, effectively limiting access to wealthier citizens who could afford the annual subscription costs. Prentice's libraries represented another model, established by philanthropic groups specifically to provide technical and moral reading material for young workers learning their trades. Meanwhile, school district libraries became popular in the 1830s and 1840s, particularly in New York and Massachusetts. These were often tied directly to public school systems and represented the closest precursor to truly tax-supported libraries, foreshadowing the democratic model that would soon emerge. The birth of the modern public library, 1850–1900. The mid-19th century marked a pivotal transformation in American library history with the formal establishment of the first truly tax-supported, free-to-all libraries. This era fundamentally changed who could access knowledge and information in American society. The Boston Public Library, established in 1854, is often cited as the first major municipal library to fully embody the principles of public funding and universal access. This wasn't simply about providing books, it represented a philosophical commitment to democratic ideals. The founders believed that a literate, informed populace was essential for a functioning democracy. This era was driven by the conviction that libraries could serve multiple social purposes simultaneously. Civic leaders saw libraries as institutions that could assimilate immigrants into American society, uplift the poor through education and self-improvement, and create an informed citizenry capable of participating in democratic governance. The Boston model quickly spread to other cities, establishing the blueprint for public libraries that persists to this day. The Carnegie era and expansion, 1900–1920s. The most significant period of physical library expansion in American history was fueled by the philanthropy of Andrew Carnegie, the steel magnate who devoted much of his fortune to educational causes. His impact on the American library landscape cannot be overstated. Between 1883 and 1929, Carnegie funded the construction of 1,689 new library buildings across the United States. These distinctive Carnegie libraries, many still standing and in use today, brought library services to communities large and small throughout the nation. The buildings themselves became civic landmarks, often featuring classical architectural elements that signaled their importance to the community. Crucially, Carnegie's grants came with an important requirement. Local governments had to commit to annual maintenance funding, ensuring the long-term sustainability of the institutions. This stipulation was visionary. It prevented communities from accepting a building they couldn't afford to operate. This era cemented the library as a permanent fixture in American towns and cities, creating the infrastructure that would support library services for generations to come. Professionalization and social outreach, 1930s–1970s. The mid-20th century witnessed the transformation of librarianship from a vocation into a true profession, complete with standardized training, ethical guidelines, and specialized skills. This period shaped the modern library profession we recognize today. The establishment of standardized cataloging systems, most notably the Dewey Decimal System, brought order and consistency to library collections nationwide. Library schools developed rigorous curricula, and professional organizations set standards for education and practice. Librarians increasingly saw themselves as information specialists with a unique and valuable expertise. During the Great Depression, libraries served as essential refuges and educational centers for the unemployed, demonstrating their value during times of economic crisis. After World War II, federal legislation provided crucial funding to expand services into previously underserved areas. The Library Services Act of 1956 and the subsequent Library Services and Construction Act brought library resources to rural communities that had never before had access to such services. This era established the principle that library access should extend to all Americans, regardless of where they lived. The digital revolution transforms libraries. Beginning in the 1980s and accelerating through the present day, the integration of computers, the internet, and digital media has fundamentally redefined the library's role in society. This technological transformation has been nothing short of revolutionary. Libraries rapidly adopted technology at every level of their operations. The familiar card catalogs gave way to digital databases and online catalogs. Patrons could suddenly search entire collections from a single terminal and eventually from their home computers. Behind the scenes, integrated library systems streamlined acquisitions, circulation, and cataloging processes. Perhaps most significantly, libraries became critical providers of free internet access, especially for low-income populations lacking home connectivity. As the internet became essential for job searches, government services, and educational opportunities, libraries stepped in to bridge the digital divide. Today, libraries continue to adapt to new technologies, from ebooks and streaming services to emerging tools like artificial intelligence. The fundamental mission remains unchanged, ensuring equitable access to information, even as the formats and delivery methods continue to evolve. Core services beyond books. While book circulation remains central to library services, modern libraries track and provide an increasingly diverse array of resources and services. Understanding this expanded scope is essential for appreciating what libraries actually do in their communities today. Libraries host millions of programs annually, ranging from early literacy story times that build reading readiness in young children to adult education workshops covering everything from computer skills to financial literacy. Job search assistance helps unemployed patrons write resumes and practice interview skills. Citizenship classes prepare immigrants for naturalization tests, fulfilling the library's historical role in supporting new Americans. Digital equity has become a core concern, with libraries serving as the primary public access point for the internet for millions of Americans. This role in bridging the digital divide has become increasingly important as more essential services move online. Modern library staff often require expertise far beyond traditional reference services. Technology skills, data management capabilities, social work training, and specialized community outreach abilities are all part of the contemporary librarian's toolkit. Modern expectations, digital access, and community space. The 21st century library is characterized by innovation driven by community needs. Today's patrons arrive with expectations that would have seemed foreign just a generation ago, and libraries have responded with remarkable creativity and adaptability. Digital access has become paramount. Libraries now provide high-speed Wi-Fi throughout their buildings and increasingly lend Wi-Fi hotspots that patrons can take home. Digital literacy training helps community members navigate an increasingly online world, from basic computer skills to evaluating online information sources. The concept of the library as a community hub has led to the creation of flexible spaces that serve multiple purposes. Meeting rooms accommodate community groups, book clubs, and civic organizations. Co-working areas provide workspace for remote workers and freelancers. Some libraries even offer cafe services. These spaces function as what sociologists call third places, neither home nor work, but vital spaces for community connection and informal gathering. This evolution reflects a recognition that libraries serve social needs as well as informational ones. Innovation in action, makerspaces, and skill building. One of the most visible innovations in modern libraries is the integration of makerspaces, dedicated areas equipped with tools and technology that allow patrons to create, build, and learn new skills. These spaces represent a significant expansion of the library's traditional mission. Makerspaces typically feature equipment like 3D printers, laser cutters, and robotics kits alongside more traditional craft supplies. Libraries offer coding camps for young people, introducing them to programming concepts and computational thinking. Audio and video production equipment allows patrons to create podcasts, music, and films. Sewing machines, woodworking tools, and electronics components round out many collections. The philosophy behind makerspaces connects directly to the library's educational mission. By providing access to expensive equipment that few individuals could afford to purchase, libraries democratize the ability to create and innovate. A teenager from a low-income family can learn 3D modeling and printing just as easily as one from a wealthy household. These spaces also foster community connections as patrons with different skills teach and learn from one another. Libraries and social services. An increasingly significant and sometimes controversial development is the library's role in providing social services. Many libraries now employ or partner with social workers or peer navigators to connect patrons with essential resources. Libraries have become the only safe, non-judgmental public space available to many vulnerable populations. Patrons experiencing homelessness, addiction, or mental health crises frequently turn to libraries for shelter and assistance. Unlike other institutions, libraries don't require patrons to purchase anything or prove their eligibility. They simply welcome everyone who walks through the door. This expanded role reflects both the library's commitment to serving all community members and the reality that other social safety net services have been reduced or eliminated in many communities. Library social workers help connect patrons with housing assistance, mental health services, substance abuse treatment, and other resources. While this work stretches beyond traditional library functions, proponents argue it represents a natural extension of the library's mission to serve as a resource for all community members, particularly those with the fewest alternatives. Collection diversity and representation. Modern libraries have made active efforts to ensure their collections reflect the full diversity of human experience. This commitment to collection diversity represents both a practical response to changing demographics and an ethical commitment to representation. Historically, library collections often reflected the perspectives and experiences of dominant cultural groups, inadvertently marginalizing other voices and stories. Contemporary collection development practices actively seek materials that represent diverse linguistic, cultural, and minority experiences. This includes works in multiple languages, books featuring characters from underrepresented groups, and materials that present a variety of perspectives on historical and contemporary issues. These efforts extend beyond simply purchasing diverse materials to actively promoting and highlighting them. Displays, reading lists, and programming draw attention to materials that might otherwise be overlooked. The goal is ensuring that every community member can see themselves reflected in the library's collection, and that all patrons have opportunities to learn about experiences different from their own. The traditionalist perspective, the library as archive. Understanding the different philosophical perspectives on library services helps explain many contemporary debates about library priorities. The traditionalist view emphasizes the library's primary role as a repository of knowledge, focusing on collection development, preservation, and scholarly access. Traditionalists often express concern that the shift towards social programming and technology services dilutes the core mission of literacy and intellectual pursuit. From this perspective, the library's fundamental purpose is providing access to the written word and creating quiet spaces conducive to reading and study. Activities like knitting clubs, cooking classes, or gaming programs, while perhaps enjoyable, distract from this essential function. This view prioritizes the physical book and the curated collection developed by professional librarians, exercising informed judgment about quality and lasting value. Traditionalists argue that in an age of information overload and declining attention spans, the library's role as a guardian of serious reading and deep thinking has never been more important. They worry that chasing relevance through trendy programming ultimately undermines the institution's distinctive contribution to society. The progressive perspective, the community anchor. The progressive view sees the library as a dynamic social institution that must adapt to immediate community needs. From this perspective, relevance comes from responsiveness, and a library that doesn't address pressing community concerns risks becoming irrelevant. Progressives argue that if the library does not address issues like digital literacy, joblessness, or social isolation, it abandons its commitment to serving all community members. The families struggling to get online for remote schooling, the job seekers who need help with applications, the seniors isolated by the pandemic, all deserve the library's attention and resources. Limiting services to traditional book lending means serving only those already well-positioned to benefit. This view supports expansion into social services, technology training, and the creation of flexible, open spaces that encourage interaction and collaboration. The library building becomes a platform for community connection rather than simply a warehouse for materials. Programming and services should respond to expressed community needs, even when those needs extend beyond what libraries have traditionally provided. The measure of success is community impact, not collection size. The economic perspective, library as investment. A third perspective, often favored by municipal leaders and policymakers, frames the library as a crucial economic engine for the community. This view emphasizes return on investment and measurable community benefits. Libraries support workforce development by providing job search resources, skills training, and educational opportunities. Small businesses benefit from free meeting spaces, internet access, and research resources that would otherwise be expensive to obtain. Studies consistently show that library presence increases nearby property values, improving quality of life and the local tax base. From this viewpoint, library funding is not an expense but a strategic investment in human capital and community infrastructure. Every dollar spent on library services generates multiple dollars in community benefit. This perspective has proven persuasive with many local officials who must justify budget allocations in competitive environments. It also helps libraries demonstrate value in terms that resonate beyond the library community, building political support for sustained funding. Intellectual freedom versus community standards. One of the most enduring controversies in library services involves the tension between intellectual freedom and community standards, particularly concerning materials aimed at children and young adults. This debate has intensified in recent years. Organized groups frequently demand the removal or relocation of specific titles through formal book challenges, arguing that certain materials are inappropriate for children or violate community moral standards. Debates often focus on books dealing with LGBTQ+ themes, race, sexuality, or other topics that some community members find objectionable. Challengers typically argue they are protecting children from harmful content. Librarians, guided by the American Library Association's Library Bill of Rights, generally defend the principle of intellectual freedom. Their position holds that parents, not the library, should determine what their own children read, and that library collections must represent diverse viewpoints. Removing materials based on some community members' objections amounts to censorship that harms other community members who want access to those materials. This tension reflects broader societal debates about who gets to determine appropriate content for young people. Funding challenges and equity concerns. Public libraries rely heavily on local property taxes for their funding, creating significant disparities in service quality between wealthy and impoverished districts. This structural inequality raises fundamental questions about library equity. Communities with strong property tax bases can afford extensive collections, modern facilities, robust programming, and adequate staffing. Meanwhile, communities with limited tax revenues struggle to maintain basic services. The result is that those who most need library services, residents of economically disadvantaged areas, often have access to the least resourced libraries. Debates continue about whether federal or state funding should be increased to ensure a baseline level of service quality across all communities, or whether local control and local funding responsibility should be maintained. Additional concerns arise from trends toward privatizing certain library services, such as collection processing or even full library management. Critics worry about accountability and labor practices when private companies operate public institutions. These funding questions will shape library services for decades to come. Theoretical frameworks: why libraries exist. Scholars have offered several competing explanations for why public libraries emerged and what purposes they ultimately serve. Understanding these frameworks illuminates ongoing debates about library priorities. The democratic imperative theory posits that the public library arose primarily from the need to sustain a democratic republic. Scholars emphasizing this view argue that the library was a necessary tool for universal education, ensuring that citizens could engage with complex political and social issues and thereby preserve self-governance. The library's mission is fundamentally civic. The social control theory offers a more critical perspective, suggesting that early public libraries were instruments for managing immigrant and working-class populations. By providing access only to approved literature, often moralistic or vocational texts, elites sought to assimilate immigrants, discourage radicalism, and instill middle-class values. The technological determinism theory explains modern library evolution as driven primarily by technological shifts, with the institution's survival depending on its ability to adapt to new information formats. Each framework highlights different aspects of library history and suggests different priorities for the future. Unanswered questions facing libraries. Despite extensive research and centuries of experience, several critical questions about the future and impact of American public libraries remain open. These questions will shape library services in the coming decades. How can libraries effectively quantify the value of services like digital literacy training, social worker partnerships, or the provision of safe community space, especially when traditional metrics like circulation are declining? As digital collections grow, what is the optimal balance between physical collections, flexible community programming space, and technology infrastructure? Will the library building remain essential, or will services increasingly migrate entirely online? Given the volatility of local tax bases and the rising costs of digital licenses, ebooks often cost libraries significantly more than print books. What sustainable, equitable funding model can support the library's expanding mission? And how should libraries ethically and effectively combat the spread of misinformation in a polarized media environment while still upholding the principles of intellectual freedom and neutrality? These questions have no easy answers, but grappling with them is essential work. Conclusion: the library's enduring mission. As we've seen throughout this presentation, the American Public Library has demonstrated remarkable adaptability over nearly 2 centuries. From subscription libraries serving colonial elites to modern community hubs offering everything from ebooks to social services, libraries have continuously reinvented themselves while maintaining their core commitment to free access to information. The debates we've explored between tradition and innovation, intellectual freedom and community standards, local control and equitable funding reflect the library's vitality as a democratic institution. These tensions are not problems to be solved, but rather ongoing conversations that keep libraries responsive to changing community needs and values. What remains constant is the library's fundamental mission: to foster literacy, critical thinking, and informed citizenship. Whether through a physical book, a digital resource, a community program, or a conversation with a librarian, the public library continues to serve as a cornerstone of American democracy. As library professionals and supporters, we inherit both a proud tradition and an evolving set of challenges that will require creativity, commitment, and courage to address. Thank you.